At the Merewick Water Board meeting, Ada Mercer watched the chairman sweep her test reports onto the floor and invite the room to laugh. 5 men occupied the polished side of the table. Ada stood at the narrow end with her sample case at her feet and a rolled survey beneath one arm. Rain had darkened the shoulders of her coat. She had walked 3 miles that morning to collect the last bottle from Miller's Row, where 4 children were ill and every kettle left a yellow skin upon the water. "Miss Mercer has mistaken a village well for a laboratory," said Chairman Prowse, "and apprehension for evidence." Sir Roland Kersey smiled without showing his teeth. His color works employed 200 men, supplied green pigment to paper manufacturers across the county, and paid for the clock above Merewick Hall. The board treated his generosity as if it were a natural resource. Ada knelt and gathered the pages. The county analyst found arsenic in 3 samples. The affected wells lie below the settling ground of Kersey Works. The unaffected wells do not. "A trace," Kersey said, "present in the valley soil. Then it should also be present uphill." Someone in the public seats gave a nervous cough. Chairman Lucian Prowse tapped his silver pencil against the table. Ada knew that pencil. For 6 months she had copied elevations, calculated gradients, and corrected the board's neglected pipe schedules while Prowse signed the results as his own. Her father had taught her to use a level before she was tall enough to carry its tripod. Thomas Mercer had said that water respected neither titles nor excuses. It went where the ground allowed, and a truthful survey would follow. He had been dead 7 weeks. Prowse slid a prepared paper toward her. "Withdraw the allegation. Acknowledge that your collection methods were unreliable, and the board may overlook this disturbance." Ada read the first line, although she already understood the choice. Her rooms above the board office belonged to her position. Her weekly 32 shillings paid the chemist, her coal merchant, and the final expenses from her father's illness. "Dr. Pollard sealed the bottles himself," she said. "I will not call his work unreliable." Prowse looked almost relieved. "Then your appointment is terminated." The porter carried her sample case outside before the meeting ended. By noon, a notice bearing her name had appeared beneath the board clock. It accused her of spreading alarm and exceeding the duties of a temporary survey assistant. Men who had once asked her to locate leaks crossed the street rather than meet her eyes. Ada spent the afternoon packing her father's brass level, chain, compass, notebooks, and 2 dresses into a borrowed handcart. On the desk lay a solicitor's envelope she had been avoiding. Thomas had left no savings. His only property was the old West Merewick pump house, bought at a rates auction 12 years earlier and abandoned ever since. The roof was broken, the engine gone, and £11 in rates remained unpaid. If Ada could not settle them by the 1st of November, the parish could apply for possession. As she tied down the last box, Kersey entered without knocking. He wore a dove-gray coat untouched by the rain. "Your father's ruin is an awkward inheritance. I am prepared to give you £50 for it." The offer was absurdly generous. It would clear her debts and buy time enough to seek work in Leeds. For one dangerous moment, Ada imagined a clean lodging where no one knew the notice beneath the clock. "Why do you want it?" "The building lowers the appearance of the western road. Your works lie east." His gaze rested on Thomas's level. "Take the sensible escape, Miss Mercer. Merewick has already decided what you are." Ada thought of the reports on the floor and of 9-year-old Nell Dunn, whose mother boiled tainted water until the kitchen walls streamed. She thought of Thomas teaching her to sight a staff across a flooded meadow, while other fathers taught their daughters to embroider. He had bought the pump house for a reason he never explained. £60, Kersey said. Ada closed the lid of her tool chest. No. The pump house stood beyond the last cottages, where the western road narrowed between thorn hedges and a disused mill leat. Its stone walls leaned without quite surrendering. Half the slate roof had fallen into the engine room, and elder roots had opened the mortar around the north window. A board-painted dangerous property hung from one hinge. Ada arrived near dusk with the handcart and 1 shilling 8 pence in her purse. She cut the rusted chain from the door with Thomas's cold chisel. Inside, rain struck broken slates and gathered in a black pool where the beam engine had once worked. Nettles grew through the ash floor. The air smelled of wet limestone, mouse nests, and old iron. It was still hers. She cleared a dry corner in the former keeper's room and set her lantern upon an overturned valve crate. Beneath 20 years of grime, a painted measuring scale remained on the wall. The 0 mark sat level with an empty stone channel leading west. On the opposite wall, 3 pipe mouths had been cut away for scrap. The 4th remained. It emerged low in the northern foundation, 6 inches across, and ended beneath a thick iron cap. Mortar had been packed around it more recently than the stones beside it. Ada wiped the metal with lamp oil. Raised letters appeared under her rag. Bracken and Sons, Wakefield. Below them was the date 1851, and a small triangular mark crossed by 3 lines. The board's plan described the pump house as an 1867 drainage station. Kersey's solicitor had repeated that date in the rates papers. Ada took out her compass. The capped pipe passed not toward the dry leat, but northeast beneath the boundary wall and the first row of cottages. Its visible fall was toward the engine room. It had once brought water in, not carried waste away. She was measuring its angle with a folding rule when footsteps stopped outside. "You cannot sleep in there." A broad woman in a wet shawl stood at the threshold, with a girl pressed against her skirt. Ada recognized Hester Dunn from Miller's Row and Nell from the list of patients. The child's face was pale except for 2 feverish patches. "I can until the roof finishes falling," Ada said. Hester did not smile. "Kersey says you frighten decent people with nonsense." "Kersey does not drink from your well." The woman's jaw tightened. She carried an empty pail. "The standpipe is locked. They say it will remain locked until the panic ends." Ada looked at Nell, then at the rainwater spreading across the engine room floor. "Bring every clean vessel you own, not the well pail. Something that has held milk or beer. Rainwater will make her worse. Not if we catch it before it touches this floor." Hester hesitated, suspicion fighting necessity. At last she turned toward the cottages. Ada climbed the keeper's stair and worked until darkness, clearing moss from a surviving gutter, wedging a length of sheet iron beneath the broken edge, and washing out an old stone cistern with the last of her drinking water. Her hands shook from cold and hunger. When Hester returned with 2 crocks and a copper boiler, a thin, clean stream had begun to tap against the cistern. Ada showed her how to strain it through boiled cloth and charcoal, then boil it for Nell. "This will not remove every poison," she warned. "It is only safer than the well, until we have another source." Hester glanced into the roofless chamber. "And what will you drink?" "The same." That night, wind moved through the empty window sockets. Ada lay beneath her father's coat, listening to drops count themselves into the cistern. At some hour past midnight, another sound entered the rhythm, a faint, steady murmur beneath the northern wall. She raised the lantern and placed her palm against the capped pipe. The iron was colder than the room, and somewhere beyond it, water was moving. At first light, Ada carried her level outside. The pump house ground sloped east toward Merewick Beck, but the pipe under the wall rose toward the limestone shoulder of Barrow Hill. If it followed a constant fall, its source had to lie above the village. She drove a ranging rod beside the wall and sighted along the road. The rod drew an audience. 2 boys jeered that she was measuring a grave. An elderly laborer spat into the nettles and called the building Kersey's Folly. Hester said nothing when she passed, but the copper boiler she carried smelled of rainwater rather than the Miller's Row well. Ada traced the boundary on foot. 38 yards from the pump house, half buried beneath a hawthorn, she found a squat stone marked with the same triangle and 3 lines as the pipe cap. It did not appear on her deed. A shallow depression ran from it beneath the road, straight enough to be made by settled trench fill. She had just set the survey chain when a young man in a leather apron approached from the cottages. He was 17 or 18, with red hair, a bruised cheek, and a plumber's wrench pushed through his belt. "Jacob Fenlow," he said. "I maintained wash lines at Kersey Works until yesterday." "Why yesterday?" I asked why the waste pond level dropped when there had been no rain. He glanced toward the factory chimneys. "Mrs. Dunn says you need roof battens." Ada had no money for labor. Jacob seemed to read the refusal in her face. "My father drinks from number 3 well," he said. "Pay me when you can." They spent the morning making one room weather-tight. Jacob salvaged sound timber from the fallen stair, while Ada sorted slates by thickness and marked the weakest roof stones with chalk. They did not pretend to repair the engine room. They braced the keeper's room, patched 9 feet of roof, and fitted the window with oiled cloth. It was the sort of work Thomas had respected. First keep out weather, then keep records, then attempt only what the purse could bear. At noon, Hester brought bread, dripping, and a message. Nell's sickness had eased enough for her to ask for food. "You were right about the well," Hester said quietly. "One good morning is not proof. You sound determined not to enjoy being right." Ada looked toward Merewick, where the board clock rose above the roofs. Being right has done little for anyone so far. After they ate, Jacob helped her remove the cap. The bolts had been hammered flat, not rusted shut. Someone had meant the pipe never to open. They filed 2 heads, heated the 3rd, and worked the cap loose by fractions until it dropped onto the floor with a deep metallic note. The inside was dry for the first arm's length. Beyond that, white mineral crust ringed the lower half. Ada scraped some into an envelope. It was pale calcium deposit, the residue of hard spring water, with none of the green stain found in the factory drains. Jacob held the lantern close. "Can you see the end?" "No, but look at the seam." The lowest internal seam had been polished smooth in the direction of flow. Water had entered the pump house from the hill for years, perhaps decades. Ada fed a waxed cord through the pipe until it stopped at 42 feet. When she pulled it back, the final 6 inches were wet. They returned outside and measured 42 feet from the wall. The cord ended beneath the middle of the road, close to another sunken marker. This stone bore the number 2. "There will be more," Ada said. Jacob stared along the cottages. "Kersey's survey says no water main ever crossed this road." Then either iron learned to crawl underground, or his survey is false. By evening they had found stones 3 and 4. The 4th stood behind the bakery, where damp moss grew in a straight line even though the yard around it was dusty. The 5th should have stood inside the fenced loading ground of Kersey Works. Ada stopped at the gate. A watchman rested his hand on his truncheon. No entry by order of Sir Roland. She could not lawfully cross. Instead, she sighted over the fence and wrote the elevation in Thomas's notebook. The old pipe maintained a steady fall from Barrow Hill to the pump house. It passed beneath the edge of the works because the works had been built over it. On their return, they found a red notice nailed to Ada's door. The parish surveyor would inspect the dangerous structure in 10 days, after which the board intended to seek an order for demolition. Kersey's card was pinned beneath it. On the back he had written a new figure, 80 pounds. Ada fed the card into her small stove. The flame burned blue along one corner before curling the gentleman's name into ash. The next morning she began with people rather than pipes. Using the board's own street plan from memory, Ada marked every household that had reported stomach pain, numbness, or persistent sores. Hester went door to door with her, enduring slammed doors and collecting names from those willing to speak. The pattern grew by noon. Illness crowded the shallow wells east of Kersey's settling ground and thinned sharply along the higher western lane. Could the soil not change there? Hester asked. It could. That is why a pattern asks a question. It does not answer one. At St. Jude's Vestry, The Reverend Elias Marr received them with a distracted kindness and 3 decades of dust on his cuffs. He had already heard that Ada was a dangerous young woman. He also remembered Thomas Mercer repairing the church cistern without charging for his labor. The parish maps occupied a wooden chest beneath the marriage registers. The current plan showed Kersey Works as one unbroken parcel extending to the western road. An older tithe copy, dated 1853, showed something else. A narrow strip labeled Watercourse Number 7, running from Barrow Hill through land later purchased by the Kersey family. The strip widened around the pump house and continued beneath Merewick toward a public fountain in the market square. Someone had crossed out the label in brown ink. Ada held the sheet obliquely to the window. The paper beneath the alteration had been scraped thin. When was this amended? Marr opened the vestry minutes. Several pages from 1865 had been cut close to the binding, but an earlier volume contained monthly entries for the Bracken Water Fellowship. Washerwomen, quarrymen, shopkeepers, and laborers had each subscribed a penny or two. The final legible entry recorded payment to Agnes Bracken for iron pipe and filter stone. "Who was she?" Hester asked. Marr shook his head. "The name survives on no memorial." Ada copied the entries exactly. In Thomas's notebook, she found a column of elevations taken 12 years earlier along the same strip, and never explained them. Beside the highest figure, he had written only, "The fall remains true, though the map does not." The words tightened something behind Ada's ribs. Thomas had not bought a ruin on a whim. He had measured the lost line, reached some barrier, and left the question for a future he had not lived to see. On the church steps, Kersey waited beside his carriage. "You are making yourself conspicuous," he said. "You arranged a public dismissal. Obscurity is no longer available to me." He offered £100. When she refused, his manner hardened. He said the watercourse strip had been extinguished when his father consolidated the works. He said old maps carried no force against modern deeds. Then he mentioned, too casually, that Ada's father had spent his last years chasing the same fantasy. You knew he surveyed the line. Everyone knew Thomas Mercer had become unwell. Thomas's final illness had weakened his hands, but never his judgment. Ada stepped close enough to see a fleck of shaving soap beneath Kersey's ear. "If the line is imaginary, why have you tripled your offer?" His coachman looked away. 10 days, Kersey said. "After that, there will be nothing left to sell." Ada returned to the pump house and studied its floor until twilight. The old plans were missing, but pipework left its own grammar. An inlet required a controlling valve, a pressure release, and some means of inspection. The engine had been removed, yet 2 mounting bolts remained beside the north wall. Their spacing did not match a beam pump. When she cleared the ash between them, her trowel struck an iron ring set flat into a slab. Jacob fetched a pry bar. Together they lifted the slab 3 inches before a rush of cold air extinguished the lantern. Below them, stone steps descended into darkness. They waited until morning. Ada tied a rope around her waist, tested each stair with the pry bar, and made Jacob remain above. The passage turned beneath the north wall and opened into a maintenance gallery no wider than her outstretched arms. White ceramic tiles lined its lower courses. 4 brick basins sat beyond a railing, their surfaces hidden beneath fallen timber and silt. The sound of water was louder there. A narrow rill entered through a crack in the far masonry, crossed one basin, and vanished beneath the floor. It was clear enough to show every grain of sand below it. Ada filled a sterilized bottle, sealed it, and wrote the time and place on the label. She would not call it safe until Pollard examined it. On the gallery wall hung a bronze plate green with age. Jacob lowered a lamp on a cord while Ada cleaned it with chalk. Letters emerged. The Merewick Water Fellowship, 1852. Beneath the heading were 37 names, most matching the penny subscriptions in the vestry book. Agnes Bracken's appeared last, followed by engineer and keeper in trust. The basins were not ordinary tanks. Layers of grated gravel, washed sand, and charcoal remained beneath the silt. A float chamber connected them to the capped inlet pipe, while a second main continued east toward the village. The missing engine had not drawn water from a well. It had powered cleaning brushes and lifted water to a high cistern when spring pressure fell. Inside a wall cupboard, Ada found brass gauge fittings, a broken sampling cup, and 3 slate tablets covered in maintenance figures. One tablet showed a sequence of 7 inspection plates. The last 2 entries had been deliberately chipped away. "This could have supplied the whole village," Jacob whispered. "Not without repair, and not unless the spring still belongs to the line." A board creaked above them. Ada called Hester's name, but no answer came. Jacob climbed first. By the time Ada reached the engine room, a man was slipping through the doorway with Thomas's notebook under his coat. Jacob caught him beside the boundary wall. They struggled in the nettles until the stranger struck Jacob across the temple with a short iron bar. Ada ran toward them, shouting. The man dropped the notebook and escaped through the hedge to a waiting cart whose sideboards carried the faded green of Kersey Works. Jacob insisted he could stand. Then his knees folded. Dr. Pollard charged 12 shillings for the journey from the county town, and another 8 for dressing the wound. Ada paid him with the sovereign she had reserved for the first quarter of parish rates. Jacob's skull was not fractured, but he needed rest and watching. She gave Hester the key to the keeper's room and spent the night beside him, waking him every 2 hours as Pollard instructed. The chemist examined the bottle from the gallery before leaving. "I will test it beside your earlier samples. You understand that one clean trickle proves very little." "I do." "Good. Your enemies are waiting for you to claim too much." By sunrise, a constable stood outside. Kersey's watchman had accused Jacob of trespassing at the works, and Ada of directing him to steal company records. Chairman Prowse offered to withdraw the complaint if Ada surrendered the pump house deed and all papers found there. Jacob, pale beneath his bandage, tried to rise. "I never crossed the gate." Ada pressed him back onto the pallet. "Then we will not purchase mercy with a lie." The parish surveyor arrived that afternoon. He condemned the open engine room, but admitted that the keeper's room and north wall could be made secure. Kersey demanded immediate demolition. Ada produced her timber braces, roof calculations, and Pollard's receipt for Jacob's care. She accepted responsibility for the uncovered stair and agreed to fence it, but not for an assault committed outside. The surveyor granted 7 additional days for shoring, provided she found 2 pounds for materials. Ada possessed 6 shillings. She sold her mother's silver brooch to the pawnbroker and used half the money for timber. With the rest, she hired 2 carts to bring water from a tested spring 6 miles away. Hester organized distribution from the pump house yard, marking each household by size and allowing no preference for those who had mocked them. When the baker attempted to take 3 barrels, Ada gave him 1 and sent the others to Miller's Row. "You need money for your rates," Hester said after the carts departed. "Dead children will not attend my rates hearing." News of the free water brought people who would not listen to a survey. Ada showed them the county analyst's seal on the unsafe samples. She showed them how the illness map followed the ground below the waste ponds. She did not show them the underground gallery. After Jacob's injury, she trusted no crowd with the entrance. That caution cost her. Kersey announced that Ada was hiding a private well while begging for donations. Men gathered outside after dark and shouted that she meant to sell Merewick its own water. A stone shattered the oiled cloth window. Hester chased the thrower halfway down the lane with a broom. The clean spring water lasted 2 days. On the 3rd, Nell's fever returned, and Jacob's father Amos collapsed at his loom in Kersey Works. Dr. Pollard's letter arrived at noon. The gallery sample contained no detectable arsenic by his test, while the eastern wells showed concentrations he considered dangerous. He urged the board to close them pending a sanitary inquiry. Prowse refused. Ada went below with Jacob's wrench and Agnes Bracken's maintenance tablets. She had promised herself not to disturb the system until she understood it, but Merewick did not have the luxury of her caution. The rill entered beside a bronze float valve frozen under mineral scale. If she freed it, the pressure might admit more spring water. It might also burst a corroded main beneath occupied houses. She cleaned only the bypass, opened it 1/4 turn, and watched. Water rose through the first bed, clouded with silt, then cleared as it passed through the second. The old overflow began to sing. Ada checked the walls, marked the level, waited an hour, and opened another 8th turn. By evening, the outlet delivered 40 gallons, too little for the village, but enough for the sickest households. Hester filled the first pail for Amos Fenlow. Across the road, an old man with a bent back removed his cap. "I knew that sound," he said. "I was pump boy here before Kersey shut it." His name was Caleb Nunn. He touched the triangle and lines mark cut into the boundary stone and told Ada it represented hill, pipe, and public hand. Agnes Bracken had made him memorize the 7 plates along the watercourse. The 5th lay beneath Kersey's loading yard. The 6th guarded the hill valve. The 7th, she had said, was where the fellowship kept its promise. "Where is it?" Ada asked. Caleb looked toward the dark engine room. "I was 12 when they drove us out, but Mrs. Bracken always said the promise stayed with the water, even when men stole the map." Caleb's memory gave Ada a route, but not permission to follow it. Plate 5 lay beneath the factory yard, and plate 6 stood somewhere on the fenced hill pasture. Kersey's solicitor obtained an injunction the next morning, forbidding Ada or her agents from entering either property. Prowse sent a constable to seal the gate between the road and the pump house yard on the ground that crowds collected there. Ada moved the water table onto the road verge, which remained public. Hester served each pail over the hedge. For 2 days, the little bypass supplied enough for the fevered households. Ada descended every 4 hours to read the wall scale. The level remained stable. She drew the filter beds, numbered every fitting, and copied the bronze plate, while Jacob, still bandaged, recorded the flow. Caleb sat on the stair and supplied names for 12 of the 37 subscribers. Some had been dismissed from the first Kersey mill. Others had left Merewick after the fellowship closed. "Why did it close?" Ada asked. "They said the spring failed." Caleb rubbed his thumb across the carved head of his stick. "But Mrs. Bracken said a spring does not fail in one afternoon. Kersey's father brought men. Chairman Prowse's father brought papers. They locked the hill valve and called us trespassers on our own line. Thomas's elevations showed the spring still stood high enough to feed the system. What Ada lacked was the 6th plate, the spring deed, and proof that the clean line had any lawful passage through Kersey's land. On the 3rd evening, Pollard sent word that the county sanitary inspector would come within the week. That same evening, the pump house dog began barking. The animal belonged to no one. It had adopted the yard because Hester fed it crusts. Its alarm pulled Ada from sleep shortly after 2. Through the cracked shutter, she saw a shielded lantern moving beside the north wall. Then came the groan of pressure inside the old pipe. Ada seized her coat and ran toward the stair. A sharp chemical odor met her before she reached the gallery. The clear rill had turned cloudy green. It surged over the first filter bed, lifted black silt from the second, and struck the far wall hard enough to shake mortar loose. "Jacob!" she shouted toward the keeper's room. "Wake Hester! Keep everyone out!" Ada forced the bypass wheel shut. The flow increased. This water was not coming from the spring valve. Someone above the works had opened another connection, under greater head. Ada climbed onto the gallery rail and reached for the outlet gate, hoping to divert the flood into the old stone channel. The corroded handle broke in her hand. The western basin wall split. Water and gravel knocked her against the tiles. Her lantern vanished. In darkness, she found the stair rope. wound it twice around her wrist, and pulled herself above the rising filth. Jacob appeared at the opening despite her order. He lay flat and reached down until their hands met. They had barely crossed the engine room when part of the underground ceiling collapsed. A cold green torrent burst through the stair opening, spread across the floor, and escaped into the leat. Hester and 3 neighbors were already building a bank of ash and soil to keep it from the rainwater cistern. A cart rattled away beyond the hedge. Jacob ran after it. He returned carrying an iron wheel key dropped in the road. The handle was stamped Kersey Works, settling Gate 3. At dawn, Prowse arrived with the constable, the parish surveyor, and Kersey. Green residue coated Ada's yard and filled the chamber beneath it. Kersey stood where everyone could see him and declared that Ada had released poison from her own machinery. "The old works are a danger to the village," he said. "You have your proof." Ada held up the stamped key. Kersey glanced at it once. "Tools are stolen every day." The parish surveyor withdrew his 7-day allowance. The flooded foundations were unstable, the filters contaminated, and the keeper's room no longer fit for occupation. Ada received 24 hours to remove her possessions. Prowse ordered the leat dammed and the site boarded for demolition. By noon, the story had traveled through Merewick. The woman who claimed to find poison had poured it into the road. Several families emptied Ada's clean water into the gutter. The baker demanded payment for the bread he had donated. Even people who doubted Kersey kept their distance from the green-stained stones. Ada sat on her tool chest while Hester packed the bedding. Every page of the illness survey left in the gallery had dissolved. The slate tablets lay beneath tons of fallen masonry. Her mother's brooch was gone, her rate's money spent, and the only water source she had restored was poisoned. "I opened the bypass too soon," she said. "I showed him the line could work." Hester folded Thomas's coat. "You gave Amos and Nell clean water when they needed it. And now I have given Kersey a reason to bury the building. He brought the reason with him. You only made him use it where people could see." Near sunset, Caleb returned to the ruined doorway. Demolition boards prevented entry, but the flood had scoured decades of lime from the exterior overflow channel. Low on the west wall, a rectangular outline showed beneath the mud. At its center was the fellowship mark and the number 7. The promise had stayed with the water. Ada fetched the constable before touching it. She insisted that Reverend Marr and the parish surveyor witness every step. Kersey's solicitor protested, but the plate lay within Ada's undisputed boundary, and the demolition order did not take effect until morning. 4 screws had been concealed beneath lead plugs. When Ada removed them, the plate released a narrow slab of stone. Behind it was not a treasure room, but a dry ventilation recess built above the overflow. A copper cylinder rested on stone brackets, wrapped in tarred linen. The seal around its lid bore 37 tiny impressions, one for each fellowship subscriber. Marr carried it to the church beneath the constable's eye. They opened it on the vestry table and made an inventory before reading a word. The first document was an 1852 deed. Matilda Crowther, former owner of Barrow Hill, had conveyed the pump house parcel to Agnes Bracken and her successors, together with a 12-foot maintenance course from High Crest Spring to the village fountain. The water itself was held for the inhabitants who had subscribed to the fellowship. No sale, enclosure, or change of neighboring ownership could end the course without a public vote and county approval. The second document was a schedule of the 37 subscribers, their payments, and the household shares those payments created. The third was Agnes's engineering book. It described the graded filters, the spring chamber, the relief valves, and a rotating brush, driven by the water's own fall. Her design required no engine during ordinary flow. Income from workshops using larger quantities was meant to maintain free fountains and subsidize household connections. Letters filled the bottom of the cylinder. In them, Howard Kersey offered to clear the fellowship's debts if Agnes granted his mill exclusive use of High Crest Spring. She refused. Later letters described locked gates, damaged valves, and threats against subscribers employed at the mill. The final page, written by Agnes but never delivered, named Lucian Prowse's father as the clerk who altered the parish plan and presented the pump house for rate sale while its trustees were denied access. The papers explained the wrong, but papers found in a wall did not prove themselves. Ink could be forged, seals could be copied. Ada refused to let the excited vestry declare victory. "The deed says a memorial was entered with the county," she said. "We find that copy first." Travel and search fees would cost more than she possessed. Hester placed 2 pennies on the table. Caleb added 1. Jacob, Nell, Mar, and then 3 women from Miller's Row followed. By the time the church clock struck 9, the pile contained 9 shillings and 6pence, almost the same sort of humble subscription recorded in Agnes's schedule. They went to the county record office the next morning. The clerk found the memorial under Crowther, not Bracken, in a volume no Merewick official had requested for 41 years. Its boundaries, seals, and witness names matched the hidden deed. A railway survey from 1861 also showed watercourse number 7 passing beneath the future factory site. Neither record contained any lawful extinguishment. Ada then found a second discrepancy. Agnes's book listed the maker's number of each cast iron section. The pipe cap at the pump house ended in 114. Plate 5 should cover sections 79 through 83, directly beneath the settling yard. The green flood carried flakes of a sealing compound first manufactured long after the fellowship closed. Someone had recently connected Kersey's wastegate to the old clean water main. The full design emerged slowly. Highcrest Spring was not merely a source, but a protected right, capable of supplying Merewick by gravity. The pump house held a proven filtration process, a distribution schedule, and a lawful way through land Kersey claimed as absolute. Workshops could pay for measured water while public fountains remained free. Agnes had not hidden a fortune. She had hidden the means by which a village could keep its health from becoming one man's favor. Ada read Thomas's notebook again on the train home. His old elevations matched Agnes's figures within inches. He had discovered the surviving fall and bought the condemned building before Kersey could erase its final entrance. Illness and poverty had prevented him from opening the floor, but he had preserved the question. For weeks, Ada had believed he had left her a burden because there had been nothing else. Now she understood that he had left her the one thing he trusted her to read, truthful ground. At Merewick Station, a county inspector waited with 2 constables. Pollard's report and the registered deed had reached him before Kersey's men could begin demolition. He placed the pump house under sanitary protection, suspended the demolition order, and directed the constables to secure every waste ledger and valve record at Kersey Works. For the first time since the board meeting, Sir Roland Kersey could not decide which papers remained on the table. The sanitary inquiry opened 5 days later in Merewick Hall. Every bench was filled. Kersey sat at the board table with 2 solicitors and the confidence of a man accustomed to owning the room. Prowse sat beside him, though the county inspector had removed the silver pencil from his hand and placed the original minute books in evidence. Ada stood again at the narrow end of the table. This time her reports had been copied, numbered, and witnessed. Dr. Pollard began with the water. He described how the bottles had been cleaned, sealed, and transported. Samples from the eastern wells contained arsenic in dangerous amounts. Samples from Highcrest Spring and the pump house bypass did not. Residue from the green flood contained copper, arsenic, and the same binding material used in Kersey's emerald pigment room. Kersey's solicitor rose. "Can the witness prove that Miss Mercer did not introduce this material herself?" Pollard looked over his spectacles. "I can prove that the mixture matches waste, taken under seal from your client's settling gate. What purpose Miss Mercer might have had for acquiring several hundred gallons of industrial sludge, I leave to you." Laughter moved through the room, but Ada felt no triumph. Amos Fenlow sat wrapped in a blanket near the door. 3 children from Miller's Row were still under medical care. She presented her illness map, reconstructed with Hester from the household list. She explained the fall from the settling ground to the shallow wells, then set Agnes Bracken's plan beside the 1853 tithe copy, the 1861 railway survey, Thomas's elevations, and her own. 4 independent records placed the same pipe beneath the same ground. Kersey's solicitor attacked the hidden papers as romantic relics. Ada agreed that relics could not establish present condition. She then asked the inspector to display the coupling excavated under a warrant at Plate 5. It joined an 1851 Bracken pipe to a modern factory sluice. Its valve accepted the stamped wheel key found outside Ada's yard. Miss Mercer admits opening part of the old system, the solicitor said. Is it not possible that her interference drew factory waste into it? It is possible that opening the bypass changed pressure, Ada said. Murmurs rose behind her. I should have completed a pressure test before distributing the water, and I accept that error. But it could not turn a clean water main into a factory drain. Someone built the coupling. Someone opened settling gate 3 after 2 in the morning, and the volume that entered the pump house exceeded the spring bypass by more than 20 times. She placed her broken outlet handle beside the coupling. Mineral staining showed that the clean line had flowed downhill for years. The fresh green deposit lay on top of it and ran in the opposite direction from the factory gate. Water respected the ground, even when a solicitor did not. Caleb Nunn testified that Howard Kersey had closed the fellowship line while Caleb was pump boy. Reverend Marr produced the vestry volumes with their missing pages. The county record clerk confirmed the deed memorial and swore that no later instrument extinguished the water course. The factory ledgers supplied the final link. An entry from 1879 authorized use of disused Bracken conduit for occasional settling discharge, saving the cost of a new covered drain. Sir Roland Kersey's initials appeared below it. Later entries recorded payments to Prowse for favorable sanitary certificates and to the man who assaulted Jacob for night security. Kersey rose before he was called. A manager's initials approve accounts, not every workman's decision. My foreman exceeded his authority. The foreman, Edgar Toll, had spent the morning believing Kersey would protect him. Hearing that denial changed his calculation. He admitted opening gate 3 and sending a man for Thomas's notebook. Both orders, he said, came from Kersey. He produced the note instructing him to make Mercer's water show its true color before the demolition inspection. Kersey's private fear finally became public. His works were mortgaged beyond their value, and a sale to a London paper consortium depended upon uncontested ownership of the spring course and a clean sanitary certificate. Ada's discovery threatened both. His offers for the pump house had not been charity or concern for the Western Road. He had tried to purchase the one entrance through which the old trust could be proved. Prowse attempted to blame his father for the altered map. The inspector opened a recent board minute in which Prowse certified that the missing watercourse had been searched and found never to exist. Ada's first report was attached beneath it, marked for destruction in Prowse's handwriting. The inquiry lasted 11 hours. At its close, the county authority shut the contaminated wells, took temporary control of the water supply, and prohibited demolition of the pump house. Kersey's pigment rooms were closed until their drains could be contained. Prowse was removed from the board, and both men were committed for trial on charges arising from falsified sanitary records, conspiracy, and malicious damage. The attack on Jacob was charged separately. Merewick did not cheer all at once. Families depended upon Kersey's wages, and many feared that justice would close the works with the wells. Ada understood their fear. She asked the county to keep the uncontaminated departments operating under supervision and to use Kersey's seized sale deposit for emergency water and wages. The inspector adopted the proposal after Pollard confirmed that the hazard could be isolated. Hester was the first to cross the hall. She picked Ada's reports from the evidence table and squared their edges. "These belong above the clock," she said. The baker who had demanded payment left without speaking. A woman whose son remained ill apologized. 2 men did not. Caleb nodded to Ada from the rear bench, as if an honest measurement had finally been read aloud. The trials and civil proceedings occupied the winter. Kersey was convicted of conspiring to falsify public health records and of ordering the damage at the pump house. He lost his county contracts, paid a substantial fine, and served a term of imprisonment. His creditors placed the works under a receiver, who dismissed the corrupt management, but retained most of the laborers, while lined settling tanks and a lawful drain were built. Prowse lost both his office and his right to practice as a solicitor. Edgar Toll's cooperation reduced his sentence, though it did not erase the assault. Ada's own ownership required a different reckoning. Her father's rates auction deed lawfully conveyed the pump house building and keeper's residence, but the spring, main, and filters remained subject to the 1852 Fellowship Trust. She could have argued that the forgotten subscribers had no surviving claim. Instead, she posted notice in the market square, inviting their household successors to reconstitute the fellowship. At the first meeting, 83 villagers attended. They elected 5 trustees: Hester, Reverend Marr, a quarry foreman, a schoolmistress, and Ada. Caleb received an honorary place by the valve table and objected whenever anyone called it honorary. The new deed preserved Ada's home in the keeper's rooms and appointed her engineer at 36 shillings a week. Larger users would pay measured rates. Public fountains, school water, and a daily household allowance would remain free. Restoration took 11 months. The first grant paid only for shoring the gallery and removing contaminated gravel. The next money came from the factory receiver's settlement and a county sanitary loan. Agnes's rotating brush could be repaired, but 200 yards of pipe near the works had to be replaced, the spring chamber rebuilt, and the waste connection sealed under an inspector's eye. Ada refused a contractor who promised completion by Easter. His estimate ignored frost excavation supports and the cracked eastern main. Work proceeded in sections. Jacob became her paid apprentice after Pollard declared his head fully healed. He learned to keep 3 copies of every pressure figure and never to stand beneath an unsupported slab. Hester managed the water carts until the western fountain opened, then organized a public washhouse beside the pump yard. Its fees employed 4 widows and contributed to filter sand. Amos Fenlow recovered enough to maintain the washhouse boiler, though the numbness in 2 fingers never entirely left him. Highcrest Spring returned to the village in May. At first it supplied only the pump house cistern in Miller's Row. In July, the school fountain opened. By September, the market fountain ran for 12 hours a day, and tests from the eastern wells showed contamination falling after the factory drains were removed. Those wells remained locked until Pollard certified them through an entire season. Ada repaired her home with the same patience. She kept the oldest wall, replaced the dangerous roof, and turned the engine room edge into an office, with a broad table for maps. Agnes Bracken's engineering book rested in a glass-fronted case at the church when Ada was not using its specifications. The bronze fellowship plate remained underground where it belonged, but a copy hung beside the pump house door with all 37 names legible. On the anniversary of the inquiry, Nell Dunn was chosen to turn the market fountain handle. She had grown taller and wore a blue ribbon over the scar where illness had thinned her hair. Clear water struck the stone basin. No band played. Children crowded forward with cups, laundresses filled copper cans, and workers coming off the morning shift washed green dust from their hands. Ada stood beside Thomas's brass level. She wished he could have seen the water, but grief no longer made the building feel like an apology. He had preserved a question because he believed she possessed the skill to answer it. Agnes had preserved a promise because she believed a future village might choose to honor it. Neither had done the work for Ada. They had left her ground firm enough to stand upon. Kersey's old notice board remained outside Merewick Hall. The dismissal accusing Ada of public alarm was removed by county order. In its place hung the monthly water analysis, signed by Pollard, Ada, and one rotating village trustee. Anyone could read it without requesting permission. Some residents still called the pump house ugly. The eastern wall leaned, the new slates did not match the old, and winter weeds returned each year along the leat. Ada preferred it that way. Nothing about the place pretended restoration had erased what happened there. Before dawn on the first cold morning of November, she woke in the keeper's room to the steady note inside the northern wall. Once, that murmur had sounded like a secret trapped beneath a village, determined not to hear it. Now it was only water going where the honest ground allowed, carrying the fellowship's promise beneath Merewick, one clear cup at a time.